My mother had been the fallen in the room, and the body is stiff, and his eyes are open. I see it, breathing in as if air was leaking on the inside of it, and it's all on me. I knew that there was no second chance. There was no time to think about it in the past at the fault on those who deserve help or don't. The clock is made of a fuss tell each and every second, pushing up my judgment against it on the wall. I don't think, at that moment, the world is waiting for courage or boldness. It does require a choice to immediately and will be charged the price. I picked up the phone with trembling hands, dirty from the blood of my mother, and I dialed the first number that came up on the screen, the old one. I do not remember to have saved the contact. I don't remember having used one before. Even so, when the call was answered, something inside of me has got. The voice on the other side asked me who I was, didn't ask for explanations, did not demonstrate a surprise. He just said that he knew where they kept the house, and it was going to be. What would you have me to calm down? But it gave a strange feeling, as if I'd just pushed the gate strong, to be closed after that. While I was trying to get my mother's conscious of you, holding your hand and asking her not to sleep on, I began to feel that connection. It was not just a cry for help. It was as if I was fired for something that was already on the move, something that's not dependent on me to be there. It just needed a sign. Maybe you've felt it too. The impression that the right decisions are not born at the time they are made, but long before that, in a place where you don't have control over. When he walked through the door, the atmosphere has changed. There was surprise. There was no rush. There was no unnecessary questions. He moved through the house with a safe, which baffled me, as someone who recognizes in the space without even admit it. While you take care of my mother, her eyes roamed around the room and stopped at the things I had been taught not to see, the photos of old, forgotten objects, the marks of a past that has never been completely buried. He did not say anything, but he recognized it all. And recognizing it, I would learn later. It is also a way of judging silently. While we were waiting for the ambulance, he asked a question that did not fit in with the desperation of the moment. Did not ask about the health of my mother, and asked if there was anyone else hurt. He asked me if my father is still living there. Did not ask for the name. I didn't want the details. That was all. When I told him, I saw something that said on his face. It wasn't his fault, nor is that surprising. It was a decision. In that second, something has been taken, and it wasn't me who chose it. The ambulance arrived, my mother was taken away alive, and I felt such a relief that it almost caused me to fall down. I thanked him, I cried out. I decided to trust. Before leaving, Robert grabbed my arm and told me that, sometimes, to save someone is mean to condemn another person. I don't get it. Maybe you didn't want to understand it. He left without looking back, and I thought that the night was coming to an end. But the night does not end up as we think. At the hospital, the hallways are cold and the voices are low. I heard the nurses whispering to one another about the police operation is in progress, a quest that had to end that night. They spoke of a dangerous man, someone who had gone through years ago, someone who was never meant to be here. The name was not spoken, but my body reacted before my mind. My heart beat faster, my hands jalorum, and I knew that this connection was not just a cry for help. Maybe while you're listening to this right now, as you are trying to connect the dots for me, you may be starting to feel the same sadness that I felt when I realized that some of the choices may save a life for as long as you deliver another. And that's exactly where this story really starts, because it was then that the night was not over. That was just the beginning of what is yet to be revealed. Before I continue, I want to tell you one thing that I've learned the hard way. Stories like this don't get hung up on those he has experienced. They are reflected in the listener. While I do that, I know that on the other side, there are people who have already gone through making the impossible. By the choices that you make on an impulse, by the request of help with you've changed everything. If any part of what I have said so far has touched you, just leave it logged in. Write in the comments what you have felt that's such a situation that went with it, or even an experience that you never had time for it to be taken into account. At times, you put it in words, it is already a kind of relief from it. And other people can read them also feel that they are not alone. If this story had already pinned it until now and enjoy the video, this is an easy way to tell this kind of story must continue to be taken into account. It is not just in one click. This is the signal that in these stories, reach more people who may now be living in something like that, and you still don't know how to deal with it. Each and every enjoy the help of this content does not get lost in the silence. And if you feel like you want to keep track of the stories so that you don't run away from the pain, difficult choices, and the consequences are real, if you subscribe to the channel, as a gesture, automatic transmission, but as the one who decides to walk along with them, this is a space that only exists because there are people on the other side, ready to listen, to feel, and to reflect on them together. Now, take a deep breath with me, because from here, things are no longer just a gut feeling, and begin to take shape. What happened after that first night, it's really a game changer. And this is where the story starts to shiver from the truth. I still had my hand on my mom, to feel her skin cold to the other, and at the same time, trying to pretend to myself that it was just a scare. Only you have the detail of the cruel and the body. Don't believe the lie that the mind invents. I knew that the way to a more intuitive as possible, and that I was seconds from losing it all. And when the people, the slope of this place, the mindset change in the force. Some are proud, some flat, some and then I see you. It only left one thing and decision making. I looked for anything that looked like a way out. The old phone was right there, almost forgotten about it. And I grabbed it as if it were a buoy in the middle of the chaos. My hands are dirty. My nails were shaking. And I haven't even thought about cleaning anything. I just wanted to let someone else answer that. I don't want to be that strong. I didn't learn anything. I didn't want to transform any at the moment. I wanted my mother to breathe. That's when I did what I look for when someone's account. But on the inside, it's an earthquake. I dialed the first number that popped up. It was not a conscious decision. It was despair guiding my fingers. I don't even want to be saved to that contact. And that's the strange thing, because it's not a random number. It had a name, with a name that I have not seen for a long time. And even then, I didn't stop. I don't like, why are you here? I call it, as if the truth is hidden behind that name does not exist. The connection is called the bit. A little too much. And when you answered it, I was ready to explain everything, to run over you. Ready to apologize for the call, ready to beg and plead. But I didn't get to say hello, right? On the other hand, with a firm voice came, as if I already knew what was going on. Don't ask me who I was. Did not ask for the email address. Don asked, what's going on? Only said, with a calmness that it has given me anger and relief at the same time, I know where it is. I'm going to go. I was changed. Because there are things in life that seem to help, but they sound like a sentence. And I know it might sound strange, but I felt it. I felt the impact in his chest, as if I was a tight one button on it that wasn't supposed to be sad. In the sentence, it does not come in a hurry. Came with the control. And in that moment, scared me more than the movie. Because of the panic that is a human being. To control the other, at this time, looks like behind the scenes. I said, almost in a whisper, please, faster. And the voice replied, only gets it. The way that he talked to her with me, it was not with his mother, he was with it. I and you were on the same page as a story. I don't want to get you started. And that's when the brain starts to go after the answers. So I don't go crazy. I found myself trying to understand how someone meets you well. As someone who says they know where it goes, I didn't say anything. As someone who decides to come over without asking the question of who is calling you, I looked around, trying to figure out the logic in the midst of the mess. The phone in my hand, it seemed like a burden. My breath was short-lived. I had a feeling something horrible, like I had just opened a door that was never going to close. Not a physical port, a door within a day of my life. One of those that will change what you think about trust, about fate, about which it is no coincidence, and that it is a trap. I went back to my mother, and I've tried to keep a firm voice close to her, as if she could hear me, Mom. Look at me. It is right here. Breathe with me. I would say this is more for me than for her. And at the same time, deep down, a part of me was on the move. I didn't want to admit it, but something was out of place. The feeling of that night. And it was not just about healthcare. It was about the choices that come disguised as help. It was about the revelations that come through the door in the face to solve the problem. And what's worse is that, at the time, I still believed that asking for help was the right thing always. I also believed that the most urgent decisions are one of the most pure. I still did not understand that there are situations where the right and have to do not go hand in hand. I just stood there, kneeling on the floor, trying to buy time against the clock. It seemed to me to hate, hoping to hear any type of sound out there, that it confirmed that someone was from. When I heard the sound of a car stopping, and I felt relieved for a second, that sort of a relief that it almost makes you weep with gratitude. But with it came something else, a sense as small and stark, as if my conscience was trying to tell me it's too late. I have held the hand of my mother with much strength. I got up in the face, and that's exactly the moment the shadow appeared at the entrance, which I don't think it's that connection that had brought so much more than the life of a mom in the go. When he reached the door, I felt as if the air in the house had changed in pitch. It was not visible, it was a physical sensation, almost an impact on silent mode. He came in with a rush, even with an abundance of caution. Came in like the one who knows exactly where to step. Showed no surprise when she saw my mother on the floor. Didn't do that to break the typical of one who is trying to figure out the scene. Before taking any action, he just did. On his knees by her side, reached out and touched her neck, and noticed on the breath and spoke firmly, as if this situation wasn't new to him. And maybe it wasn't. As I watched, something began to bother me in a way that's hard to explain. He was not afraid to straight up. It was a discomfort that creeps in little by little. Robert did not ask the obvious. Don't wonder what had happened to me. Did not ask for long explanations. It seemed to fill in the gaps for myself, as someone who's already familiar with behind-the-scenes story before I even heard of it. This struck me because in emergency situations, we expect the confusion and no trial and error. But there was nothing of the sort. There was such a method, he had to control it. He was talking to my mother in a quiet voice, almost intimate, and asking for her to breathe, so keep your eyes peeled. And I realized what he was saying her name correctly. I don't want to be told. Maybe in the midst of their desperation, maybe it isn't, but for now, that question has gained weight to a stranger. Because when the mind starts to pick up the logic, and anything else turns around the track. And that's my mentality was no longer the same as that in just a few minutes ago. Something was changing inside of me, and as if that night was to me, shoving a transformation forced to do. While he was taking care of her, and his eyes began to roam the room, this is by no means out of curiosity, not intrusive. It was a look of recognition. He went through the wall and down the hall, through the old furniture piece by the window, and then it stopped. Exactly where I would never stop. In the photos, the old, the middle, erased by time, and in the objects, which I pretended not to notice, in the tags of the last one, which I preferred to keep it quiet for a while. He doesn't say anything, not asking questions, but the silence, it was said more than any words. There, I felt the first impact of that presence. It was not the fear of losing my mom. It was the fear of being seen in addition to that. I want to show you. As if the house were telling a whole story at once, without anyone having to speak. And Robert, I was listening to. This made me think of just how many truths are hidden in the details that we learn to ignore them. How many decisions are shaped by the things which we believe to be buried. And he arose and went to the door, and he looked quickly away, as the one who confirms it's something to be expected, and came back again. It seemed to someone jamming a helping hand. It seemed like someone is taking a step. This perception is shot, because everything changes when you realize that you're not in the center of the event, but in a larger sprocket. The gear is made of choices, old, and they are still producing the effect, even if you think you have moved on. while we were waiting for the ambulance, and the silence became awkward. I wanted to say thank you. I wanted to ask you something. I wanted to fill that space, but no words seemed to be all right. There was a tension in a discreet, almost bad, but it is constant. Robert looked at the one who revisits a familiar place after a very long time. Don't miss, with care and attention. And it made me think about how some days never end of fact. It will change the way. It was then that he asked me a question. It was not hard, nor is dramatic. It came in the middle of a common sentence, almost casual. He asked me if my father is still living there. No wonder the name. Did not ask him where he was. That was all. And in that moment, something inside of me, and if you got the time, because the question did not fit at the moment, don't fit in with a sense of urgency, or that are focused on saving a life. It was coming from somewhere else, for a deeper picture of the situation. When I said, I clearly saw something snap in his face. It was not the emotion. It was a decision. An indoor setting, such as a piece she had finally snapped. And here I have understood, even if they do not understand it all, that this night, he was not guided solely by chance. There is a truth hidden around us to the information that I had, but it had already produced an impact. The feeling was something that he had been chosen, even before I dial that number. The ambulance arrived shortly afterwards, bringing immediate relief, and almost physical. My mom was put on a stretcher, still breathing, still standing there. I feel gratitude is a deep, almost desperate. That didn't work, that decision saved lives. And maybe that's why it has been so hard to figure out that he's been set in motion. Robert has helped me to keep up with the output of it. He held my hand firmly in place as to who it is intended for safety, security, and said it something that it was an echo at me in a strange way. He said that some of the decisions that seem right at the time they are made, but to show their full impact after that, I still hadn't understood the scope of the words. Not in at the moment. I was focusing too much on the survival to the relief of the temporary, in the sense that it's the worst of it had passed. But as I watched Robert away, leaving you with the same calm that he had come to them, an idea began to form slowly. The idea is that the aid had been full of the other's intentions, with other scenes, other revelations, that they had not yet been shown to be complete. It was with this feeling uneasy, half back, when I was there, standing in the doorway, trying to convince myself that everything was under control, even with the feeling that something vital had just come out of the place. While in the ambulance, if I didn't, I was trapped in that space, the strange. Between despair and hope is a fragile, as if the house had turned into a narrow corridor, where every sound that didn't really matter too much. My mother moaned low, and I was trying to stay calm, with repeated phrases, is almost automatic, because I couldn't fall apart right in front of her. Just for the inside, I was already in another place, trying to decipher the Robert and without leaving it. To him, it was quiet, too, for a scene that called for an emergency. And this is a contrast to me, confused. I've always thought that the serenity of it was a sign of safety, security, and there seemed to be something else. It seemed like someone had already taken decisions before you arrive. He moved his hands to precision, looking at the pulse of my mother, and adjusted the position of her body, as if it was following a protocol that is invisible. And to me, that I was used to listening to what life is all about choices, I began to feel on the skin, which some of the choices don't come from us. They will only go through it. It is a transformation of weird. Because you realize that you have the control you thought you had was just an illusion, and well organized. It was in this climate that the question came from. It has not come as a hearing, does not come with a claw. He even changed the tone of his voice. He just looked at me for a second longer than necessary, and he asked me if my father is still living there. That's it, no name. No more, what's your father? No more, where is, no, how long? To a question, the clean, straightforward, and completely out of place. And when a question appears, as well, in the midst of an emergency, it is no longer a curiosity. It is the key. I still remember the silence after this. For a silent short, but heavy. Because before you could answer, I felt my body lock up as if it's a part of me wanted to tell a lie, by instinct. Not because I'm hiding something on purpose, but because at that time, the answer was an answer. It was a kind of strength, and I hate to admit it, but I said it anyway. I said, I don't. He said that he did not live there. He said quickly, as anyone who tries to close the issue. Just that in my haste did not end with nothing. The face of Roberts changed in a way that was almost inaudible. It was not an expression of the fault. It wasn't a surprise. It was not in a rage. It was a bit cold, built in, as if a piece had snapped inside him and he had just finished adjusting the root. A microgestoa look at what's going on in back. A breath which is not a failure, but that will change. In that second, I realized that the question had not been made in order to obtain the information. It had been set up as a test scenario, in order to confirm a hypothesis, to activate a plan that was already there in the scene. So hit me up with a bang, I don't get the show. I went there, kneeling down close to my mother, but my mind began to race. Why did he ask that? Why now? Why no name? That's when I felt the weight of the truth hidden close by. That feeling that you are living with something that looks simple on the outside, but on the inside it is a trap of the layers. And what's worse, I had no way to go back. I've had it plugged in. I had already opened the door. I already had this man in my home. We tend to think that the decisions that attention is a pure, coming from a place of clouds. It's just that, looking at it now, I see that the urgency of this is also the perfect setting for a handle. Because when you're in despair, you give these things without realizing it. You provide the details, you confirm routines, which reveals the fears. I was in a vulnerable condition. I wanted to save my mother. I'd do anything at all. And that's the kind of state of mind which changes with every day a person is. You don't think about the strategy, you are not able to see the traps. You'll just react. Robert stood up and walked across the room with a step contained, as if he was checking on something without making it obvious. He looked back to the old photo to the wall where all the time has left its marks for the song, which I tried not to. I felt like saying, "Why are you watching this?" But you don't get it. Something in the way he said it. He wasn't there just for the sake of my mother. And I didn't want to admit it, because to acknowledge it meant to accept the fact that I had to call for someone who might not be on my side. Or even worse, someone who never believed that it was on my side. When the buzzer finally appeared in the distance, and I almost cried with relief. The sound of approaching, it seemed like a promise. It seemed to the rescue. The paramedics came quickly. A question was asked of the things that I couldn't answer. They put my mom on a stretcher and began the procedure. And in the swirl for a few seconds, and I clung to the idea that the worst had happened. My mother was still alive. The ambulance was there. The house was silent. I want to believe that this question is strange. It had been the only one detail wrong place. But Robert was right there, watching you with a gaze that was not the one that just helps you and it will go away. It was a look of one who comes with an invisible line that runs through the scene. And when he faced me again, as if it were asked to evaluate to what I had said, I felt the same feeling that I had when I dialed the number on the feeling that something is already decided before I did. I was just playing a role, without having to know the full script. I followed my mother to the door, my hand on her hand. I heard the staff saying that they want to answer right away, and agreed with everything and without discussing it, because there was no room for doubt. It's just that, in the midst of the hustle and bustle, I saw Roberts take a step back, like someone who is preparing to leave the other way. And it was there, at my mother's in charge. And he's moving away from us, I knew. With the detail more disturbing, the question of my father hadn't been a comment on the loose. It hadn't changed in the course of that evening. And I just don't know yet where this is the direction I was pointing. When the ambulance finally, my mother took me to, and I felt a wave of relief so strong it almost knocked me over, along with the adrenaline rush. I was walking back from the stretcher by instinct, holding her hand until the last second allowed it, as if the tap should be able to prevent the worst of it. The sound of the equipment and the voices of the fast, The movement is organized, the paramedics. All the things he gave me the impression that I had managed to do it. That impulsive decision, he had saved her life. And when you are living in a moment, your mindset changes a snap. You can no longer see the world as a place to be predictable and shall look upon it as a place in which you can boot to it all. But it also can allow you to return to a thread of hope, even if only for a short time. I did it without realizing it. It wasn't just fear, it was draining. It was a feeling he had struggled with his own hands from a tragedy of love, and, for a moment, you have one. I looked up at Robert, and all I could do was say thank you. Thank you for the way that is more human, more raw. Because at that time, he was the only one that had appeared when I needed it. I did not have the power to believe, to trust, to ask questions about anything. I just wanted to believe that there was someone else a good night. And he took my gratitude in a way that was strange. It was not cold, but it was not warm. It was convenient, as a person who receives something and thinking about what comes next. He grabbed my arm firmly and don't like attention, but as the controller, such as one that you have to make sure that I don't fall for it, or that I don't run in the wrong direction. And then he said something that, at that time, he started as a rock in the middle of my chest. At times, to save someone, it is to condemn another person. I think you have flashed it, trying to understand it, because, in my mind, save that it was to save you, point. I have been living in the kind of situation where your life comes down to a now or never. And he came up with a phrase that seemed to carry a truth that is hidden, something that doesn't fit in with the gratitude or relief. I have tried to answer something. You may ask for what he wanted to say, but it did not come out. I was wary of the other. And honestly, I don't want to hear the answers, which could ruin that moment that I thought that I could still do it. From the look of it got on me for a second that it lasted longer than I should have. It was not a look of pity. It was a look of one who has measured the impact, who estimates of the consequences of the decisions that other people don't even know where you are going. That was when I saw him take a step back, as if a part of him in that scene, it had already ended. Yet it was not a farewell to normal. He didn't say, "It'll be okay." I did not say anything, "Call me." I didn't say anything that an ordinary human being would say. After seeing her daughter nearly lost her mother, he just turned around, and I was under the impression that he was going to a place where it was only played for a break. As if the house were to be the only one crossing point in the journey, the greater. What I got was not of the silence. It was the fact that he didn't look back, not even once. Not because of indifference, but as someone who knows what to look for behind the delay. As someone who is already in the mind, in the next move. And then, in the midst of my exhaustion, there was a strange feeling, a sense of security. This idea of a hazardous substance which, if my mother was on her way to the hospital and then the worst thing happened, I have embraced this idea as a cover. It's just the life of a lot of hearts show you what a relief it is not the end. It's only a break. At low tide, at times, it is the time when you are down and let fate work in silence. I stood at the door for a moment, looking at his car pull away. It was then that I had a detail I had not noticed before, and he didn't seem to be going away for a rest. It did not have the body of someone else, exhausted, then stop. He had the posture of someone who is starting out in the evening. In fact, as one of my tragedy, that individual might have been just. It's the first stop. At that time, I was still naive enough to think that it had anything to do with me. I hadn't understood how this connection, the question of my father, look at the pictures, all of it was connected. And that is the way that some of the revelations come. First, as an uncomfortable, and later as a suspect. And as quite a shock to arrange all of his memories. Because when you perceive that someone helped him to his family, but he was chasing the other part of it, and at the same time, it's in your head, it changes from place to place. You get to revisit each and every sentence, every gesture, every silence, trying to find out what was hidden in the back of what seemed to be normal. I closed the door behind me. I took a deep breath, and for the first time that night, and I was left all alone in the truth. The house was empty, but it is loaded. The phone was still where I left. On the floor, it still had the tags. And it's inside of me. A question began to grow, demanding. Corrosive if Robert wasn't going to be home, where he was going. And why is it the feeling that I had just given something without knowing it? Before going further, let me ask you something with all their heart. While you watch in this video, what's on your mind? What would you have done in my place? Has any decision-making that people will only understand when you try to imagine them, which is why I like to be aware of who is on the other side, watching. If any part of this story you have caused a nuisance, the identification, or even angry, write it in the comments. Sometimes someone else reads it and realizes he is not alone. The choices that seem to be absolutely impossible. This record is a game changer. It gives a sense of what is being shown in the video. And in a way, it keeps him alive as long as the story is still unfolding. In the hospital, a lot of cruel to make the time you turn into a thing of chewing gum. At times, 1 minute seems like an hour, and at times, an hour passes by as if it had just been washed away. I was right there, sitting in a folding chair, hard staring at a door, which he opened, and shut down all the time, waiting for me to say anything. That was not to be final and conclusive. In my head, trying to hold on to the side of logic, and she is a doctor. She is being raised. She is alive. It's just that the body is not nourished in the way of logic. Your body feeds off of the feeling. And the feeling was that I was still in the same night. It's just that now, in a scenario in which I don't believe in anything. I tried to take a deep breath, control your anxiety, keep a firm appearance, and as if that could have an influence on the outcome. It's funny how, at such moments, the mind becomes a trade in silent to the destination. You must promise things will rearrange priorities and rewrite your future in seconds. Do you think of transformation? The changes that you would make if you had a second chance at life. It's just that, while at the same time, there's a part of you that knows that it's not about deserving. It's about the impact, about as a result. There is no question that it was set in motion. While I waited, I could see people moving from one side to the other. He heard hurried footsteps, the wheels of the gurney, voice low. And it was one of those moments where I was almost mesmerized by the repetition of the environment, which I've heard are two of the nurses whispering to one another, close to the bar. It was not a conversation to be high. It was not something for me to hear. But the hospital is full of corners where the sound is spread in a strange way, and some of the words that pass through the air, as if you get the right person to go to. I've heard run, listen to the police, listen to sheriff. My heart gave a jump, dry, as if it had been pulled by an invisible thread. I didn't understand why at the time. I just felt it. He was a physicist, not immediately. A chill went up my arm, and I was left with the feeling that someone had opened a window into my heart and let go of a cold wind. I kept looking at the door of the meeting room as if nothing was going on, but on the inside I was already in another place. They said that the house had gone off in a hurry to catch a dangerous man. A man who has been missing 4 years. A man who was not supposed to be here. And when I have to hear who has been missing 4 years, I have to swallow in a dry place. My mind tried to put it away, trying to think of any other explanation. But the body he didn't expect. Your body reacted before my mind up a defense. This is the kind of response that delivers the true, hidden, when you are frightened by something, even before you understand it. It is because some part of her already knows. I felt a hand in sweat. I felt the back of his neck stiffen. I felt that tension that makes you alert, like an animal surrounded by. And I was stuck in a silent question. Why is this getting to me right now? Why do you hear these words made me feel guilty, as if I was participating in something that I don't know. It was then that my memory has begun to pull out the details in the house, as if he was revisiting the scene to find the clues. On the way to his sign, from the look of it for the pictures. The question of my father's house. The phrase about to save someone and condemn the other person. Suddenly, all of which I had been trying to push it into the corner, it started to come back up with the force. I wanted to stand up and ask what was going on. what was the name of the man, and where he was going. But there is one fear in particular that it paralyzes you fear to acknowledge the one thing that you have also. Because as long as you have not yet, there's still a silver lining in the confirmation, and closes the door. And I was closing a door that is too big for that night, without realizing it. I didn't want to quit more than one. I stood there, pretending that I was just waiting for the news. But the thoughts were, as if someone was digging through the behind the scenes of a story that I had the idea to get to know. I began to understand that what I've called it a coincidence, perhaps it was just a consequence. The making of that night, the most dejected that they had been used as a signal, as a race, as a bridge. And that's the kind of revelation that can change the way that you see it all. Do you realize that the world isn't just made out of isolated events, but are the invisible lines that cross each other at the worst possible time? The worst part is that I hadn't even heard of the name. And even so, my body had already picked one up, with a unique name, as if there was no other option. I've tried to fight it, tried to tell me that I was overreacting. That's my trauma. I was doing it to see patterns where there was none. The silence between the sentences, to the nurses, he was filled with too much. And it was a sure thing to grow on me. It's a certainty that it was not the head, was of the blood of that man who has gone missing. He had a connection with me that I didn't want to face it. I looked down at my phone as if it could give me an answer in the hospital. She couldn't, the display is erased, seemed to be staring at me from the back. I have not turned it on to anyone else. I would not have sent the message. I stood there, holding on to the unit to unlock it, because it's a part of me that already knew who I wanted it to look. And it was at that moment, the phone in his hand and his throat dry. I realized that the night was still going on. It's just that right now she was bending over me, bringing all the parts are in the way of soda. If you've read this far and feeling of this story, we write to the channel to continue to see stories like this. I've got a few seconds of staring at the phone in my hand, as if it were going to stop me from doing what I knew I had to do it. Because the call to my father, at that time, it wasn't the only one trying to contact you. It was a decision. And decision-making, when they are taken in the midst of the fear, it carries a different weight, but they will change the mindset of the people in the force. As if his life were to say, now you will see the truth I dialed. At a time, the tone sounded too loud in my ears, even with the volume turned down. The one touch, too. And then the call is dropped directly in your inbox. I hung up and I stared at the screen, waiting for a miracle. Others, such as the cell phone, was on vibrate, all alone, and he would say, I'm here, not thrilled. I tried it again. The same ritual. The same is void. And it was only then that I felt that this transformation is silently going on inside of me, the relief that I felt, for the sake of my mother. The living began to weaken, giving way to a clear-sighted and bitter, as if my body were to say, it's not over. I could just make up excuses. I could tell that he was too busy. That is, the signal was bad. What with the phone you have downloaded? Only that my head is no longer accepted explanations are comfortable with. After listening to run, search, dangerous man ringing in the hospital as a threat, without a face, there is a truth hidden, at least the whole thing. And I was starting to realize that all the things that are not connected by any chance, they are connected to because someone, somewhere, was to put the pieces together. I got up and went to a corner a little further away, such as if you moved to a place I could change what I was feeling. I sat down again. I took a deep breath. I found myself thinking of the scenes of everything that's going on behind what we see. You will have to destroy to the us to find that there is a parallel story going on, and what you are is inside of her, without having been advised of the possibility of. And then, all of a sudden, the image of Roberts going on in my house returned with a vengeance, from the look of it in the photos. The question of my father's house, in the way of control. The phrase about to save someone, and condemn the other person. Every detail seemed to be a clue as to what I did not understand at the time, and now it turned into a hammer on the back of my mind. It was at that moment my cell phone rang again. I thought for a second that it was my father returned to the connection, My heart jumped in his throat so fast that I felt dizzy. But it wasn't. It was an automated message from the local police. These messages are cold, impersonal, and with the words that you don't care if you have a heart or not. He warned about an active pursuit in the area. He asked for your attention. Ask any of the information to be communicated. Then it was the detail that made the world to be small at the address given was just a few miles from my house. Too close. Too close to be a coincidence. I was looking at that and trying to process it, because my mind wanted to deny it. He tried to say no, it's this one only in my body. He had already understood it before me again. I felt the skin prickle. I have felt your hand get cold. And then there's the convergence. It began. As if someone had turned on a spotlight at the top of the connections that I was avoiding to see you. The way that is described in the message. It's the same way that Robert had followed me to the exit. In the same way, on the same route. Even the "I'll figure something else" that he didn't say. It all began to fit together in a violent way, as if I was watching a crash in slow motion, without being able to hold on to anything. I thought about the phone call. In my link, the number that I dialed without a reminder. In fact, he said that he knew where he was. I thought about the question of my father, with a quiet that seemed to be necessary, but now it made sense, too. And when it's a thing that makes sense to you, too. You missed the ground because you realized that you might not have been the only daughter in a desperate attempt to save his mother. Maybe you've been in a play. Give us a sign to confirm. This is the kind of revelation that is said in silence because it's like screaming at her. It's only if you install it. I tried to turn on again. Not hope, but despair. Your phone called it and dropped it again. A PO box. It sounded like a door closing in my face. I began to wonder where he was, in fact, and at worst, if he knew what I was trying to say. Because there is a kind of grief that comes along with a suspect. The suspect that you or someone else has chosen not to attend. And if he chose to, he was making decisions that night. Decisions that could have a direct impact on me. My mom, all I was thinking that this was the life. I stop. Trying to maintain a semblance of normality in a place where the people are already suffering from too much different from each other. And it was only then that I realized something about the journey. Not the same old story, beautiful in itself, but the journey is real, the one that you change on the inside without asking permission. It begins when you realize that your version of reality, it was just a small part of what was going on. And I was just about to find out the size of the rest of it. The sheet fell down in a way that was dry, with no warning, no drama, foreign. It was as if someone had turned off the loud noise, the constant in my head. And then, in the silence of what's left of it, everything finally made sense. Not the kind that helps, but it's the kind that is reshaping the memory of the force. Robert hadn't shown up that night, by the way. It was not a bond. It was not humanity in its natural state. It was crawling. It was such a method. It was a decision made long before I ever played on that phone. My mother was not only a place where we want to help. It was a point. A final point on a map that he had been following for the past several months. And to me, without knowing it, he had just confirmed what he had to confirm it. The question of my father's, on the lookout for those old photos and the recognition of silent objects. None of it was random. It was all part of the reading that he had been doing before they even walked through the door. This realization hit them hard because it completely changes the narrative of what I came up with in order to survive that night. I want to believe that someone had come just to help you out. It was the only way to sustain the fear. But the truth is hidden, that is, that the support was a consequence, not a goal. My mom saved it because it was on the way. Because to ignore it would have been impossible in the face of what he was looking for. And to come to terms with it requires an inner transformation is difficult to explain because it dismantles the idea of a simple right and wrong. I found myself turning back to each and every detail with the other's mind. The quiet voice wasn't careful. He was in control. In the absence of the questions, it was not reliable. He was sure. The way he moved through the house, he was not unprepared. It was a recognition. And it's a phrase that he said before. To make it on to save someone's mean to condemn the other person is no longer a strange remark, and went on to be a warning. Not for me, for the sake of themselves. The impact of this revelation did not come as an explosion. It came as a weight. A weight settles on his chest and makes you question all of her decisions and her perception of her own participation. Because whether you like it or not, I had been a part of it. My connection isn't just a desperate request. That was the final confirmation that my dad was back. I had it delivered to such information without knowing it at the most vulnerable time of my life. And it changes the way you see the after. I began to understand that there are scenes that you will never come to those who are living for the drama the master. As I struggled to get my mother to happen to her, another story unfolded in parallel with its own rules, with the objective that they had no room for feelings. Real life doesn't pause to align with the narrative. It overrides the stories and leave us to deal with the consequences later. The more disturbing when you realize that if my mother hadn't been ill and if I hadn't switched on, and if I had chosen a different number, maybe nothing would have happened that way. But such cases are tricky. They won't lead you anywhere because of the fact it's made out of what has happened, not what might have been. And it turns out that the two lines crossed on that night, of life and of the hunt. Well aware of that, it changes the way you understand the impact. It is not about intention, it's about the effect. It does not matter what I wanted to do this. Doesn't matter what you've done. And that's a lesson the hard life. Not every decision made is born of malice, but of the entire decision-making generates the consequences might be some of the saves. The other intent upon destroying us, and sometimes they do to different things at the same time. As I walked through the hospital, trying to keep his face neutral, and I feel as if I was crossing a boundary of the invisible. Before that night, I had the idea that it helps you came clean. What a relief it was always selfless, and that people came to when they wanted to make things right. Later that night, my vision became more and more complex, more and more uncomfortable. I began to see the world as a place where the actions that are layered, and where decisions are to be made because of reasons that aren't always mentioned, and where the truth is rarely appears in all at once. And then, in the midst of it all, a question began to form, persistent, with no immediate response. If Robert is willing to save a life, as a side effect of a hunting party, to the point where he was willing to go in order to complete what he had started? Because I knew that the night had not been broken for an ambulance. She's just had a change of scenery. And then, somewhere not too far away, something was moving at the same speed. If you come up here, did you feel that same weight on his chest? As he writes in the comments of just a sentence that represents this is something like nothing is a coincidence. At times, admit that out loud is the first step to face up to what is yet about to come. The worst part of it was not understood that Robert had reasons for hiding. The worst part of it was the realization of my place in all this. Because when you figure out that someone has used the pain as a shortcut, you still have to point it out. Yet you can feel the anger in the system. You still have to convince yourself that you were just a victim. It's just that night, the truth. Don't leave me this comfort. It forced me to look at what I had done without realizing it. I have started to revisit the scene of the call, as if he were watching it from the inside out. My hands are shaking. The shedding of blood, optimized for both phones, with the momentum. And that is the number appearing on the screen as if he was waiting for me. I dialed it without thinking about it. And for a long time, I treated it as a choice then, but you're not guilty. The one who was innocent in the end. Because that's all I did, was to produce a receipt. Very good. A sure sign for those of you who were out hunting for a few months. I don't think that's in layers. As if my head were to be accepting of the very few to no break in time. The house of my mother was the last known point. My father was a shadow that is close to that email address. My connection was saying, implicitly, that Robert needed to know how. If I may, I called him the phone. I asked for help from the one place. If only I was there. And then my dad had a direct connection to it, even though I don't speak your name. Even if I can't on this one. The simple act of connecting has been signed. The impact of this change on the whole structure of the mind. Because you realize that there are decisions that seem small, but to change the targets, not for what they stand for, but because of what they reveal. I won't ask for help, only to save the mother. I turned in a row in the event that it was ready to happen, and then, in the midst of despair, I gave up the element that lacked, for sure. And do you know what is the most evil? This is what I'd like to know. I was trying to get hold of a live person. I was fighting the clock. I have not had the mentality of strategy, was not the vision behind the scenes. I had no room for suspicion. I just was worried about that. Fear makes us act fast and act quickly. Sometimes the delivery is more than we can imagine. I've always heard that. At times, extreme, we reveal who it is. But that night I learned one more thing. In times of extreme, we reveal what others want to see. I got to connect with the detail that, before, it seemed to be just a stranger. The question of my father, it was not curiosity. It was the check. Look at the photos, it was not nostalgia. It was a recognition. On the way, he said, I know where it is was not in confidence. It was the location, and the tone is calm. That quiet voice, it was the sound of an operation that was already in progress. My emergency was, and my mother was about to die. But at the same time, I was at the center of a wheel that has nothing to do with compassion. It was only then that I felt the guilt. Try to install as if it were natural, I am responsible for it all. But the guilt, it's a trap stylish. She pretends to be, which gives you control. If that's what it was my fault. I could have avoided, but it just grips you. I couldn't have predicted. I couldn't have done better with the information that I had. Yet, the reality is you do not negotiate with an intention to do so. It just shows as a result. And the result was clear. In order to help you have saved a life, he sealed the fate of the other. I thought of my father as the point of it, but as a person who, by then, there was me, in layers, perhaps absent. This too is quiet, the protector, is wrong on a few choices. One is right in the other, a human being. And all of a sudden, he turned out to be a point on the map, the name of a report, one of the most popular. And I felt that a dread, that it was not just the fear of what could happen to him, but the fear that the revelation would do it with me once. Because there is no transformation is irreversible once you realize that, due to the actions of love, you could have pulled on the rope to tighten the other person. My mind was trying to build the outputs of the imaginary. Maybe he's not there. Maybe the message is generic. Maybe it's the man that you are. Looking for is each other, but these attempts were weak, and my body had already understood what the mind wanted to deny it. And when the body is understood, it will change. It makes you alert. It makes you a little suspicious. I exist. Not by choice, but of survival. I went back to look at the phone, and there it was. In contradiction to that, I broke out within the same unit that I used to save my mother. It was the same one that had made my father is in danger. And I've noticed that if I try to connect it again, I would not be alone in seeking the contact. I was trying to stop a machine in motion. And no one can stop a machine like that's just like. I stood there for a moment. The feeling, the hospital is turned to the people around me, heard the voices in the distance. Watching the people passing by, and everything seemed to be normal, too, for the storm that was going on in my head. Life is still around, as if nothing had changed. But inside me, something that had turned upside down. I took a deep breath, as if that would give me the clarity to it. And, for the first time that night, I realized that I was no longer reacting only to the state dash of my mom. I was just reacting to the weight of the decision that I didn't even know they had taken. And that's just in this state. The guilt that tries to take over and seeing that it compels you to act. I felt like I needed to do something. Not too big, not hero, just something that you had such a sense of inevitability. And my finger hovered over the screen, ready for you to pick what to do next. I'm left with a finger stopped on the screen for too long, as they can choose the next step was to decide on the future direction of the entire universe, and perhaps that night, and decide to see it. I wanted to call someone. I wanted to run out of the hospital. I wanted to do something that, to me, to take the feeling out of control. But the control wasn't for me. It's never been before. The truth is hidden. It was going somewhere out there, and I could feel the impact of coming in before. The time spent in a broken rhythm. I was alternating between the waiting room and in the hall, among the questions that no one answered, and the silence that no one would explain. My mother went into service, and it was supposed to be my focus, but my mind was broken. For a part holding onto the fear of it breaking, the other part of the prey on which I had set in motion. It is a transformation from awkward when you realize that you can love and still be in the middle of a decision that threatens them all. And the worst part is that I wasn't fighting an enemy is visible. I was struggling with a link. I found myself looking at the police officers who came in and out of the hospital at a rapid pace. The go sizzling, the expression closed down. It was not curiosity. It was an instinct. I've wanted it as a sign. I wanted something that would tell me that I was wrong. Just that the more I tried, the more my body was going to fall. Your mindset changes when you go in this state. You begin to interpret the world as a warning. For a look, that is a warning. Cochicho, it's a warning. A door opening to it's a warning. And I was too tired to even pretend to be calm. Finally, my phone rang. I felt a heartbeat is so strong that it hurt. I thought it was my dad. For a second, looking ridiculous. And I thought that he had found a way to turn me on. I was going to say, it's all right. That would explain it all to you. And that I was overreacting. But it wasn't. It was an unknown number. And the voice on the other side. It was official it too much to bring in to any of relief. I listened to sentences that seemed to be made to not get greedy. Lady Sophia, we need to verify some information. There was a confrontation. The word for the clash came onto me how to cut, dry place. From then on, I've only heard bits and pieces, as if the rest of the world had fallen apart. They told him that he was to be found in that one night. It was said that the team I was with him, Robert. They said that there was a resistance movement, an outcome that was not what they wanted, but that's what happened. And I just realized that there's a kind of pain that you don't blow up. It only makes you empty. I don't remember sitting down, but as soon as I knew it, I was sitting on the floor, leaning against the cold wall of the corridor, with the phone still in his hand. People passed by and looked at each other, but I couldn't raise my head. The word found Martelava. Found the means to be found. It means to shut up. This means that the search has finished. And if that is the search has finished, to my question, my relationship had been, and had met with the one and only thing that I most feared as a result. I have been trying to fit it inside of me, in a way that's not for me to destroy it completely. My dad, for me, has always been a complicated blend of absence and presence. It was the kind of person who disappears for periods of time and coming back as if nothing had happened, leaving gaps in the air. I grew up with that mentality of survival of the not said. Reading between the lines, you accept the silence. Just that. Nothing had prepared me for the silence finally to an operation that will start the possibility of asking after you. The most haunted been imagining the scene of what's out there. I can't even, and they may not want it to be. That to me, which was he was reminded of Robert the inside of my house 4 hours before. His hand is holding my arm firmly in his stalled when I was almost sold to the still. Small voice telling me to stay with my mother. And then, all of a sudden, the man was on the other side of the map, in the center of the conflict. In the same calm, the same level of control. And it is now applied to a target that does not have space for in my own story. I've got some time later, a written confirmation. In the report, in a paper in cold weather, is organized with the timetable and procedures, and their names, and there it was. My father's name, in line with the letters work as if it were a single item. And at the bottom, a subscription that made me feel nauseous, Robert. It's hard to explain what it is with the head of a person, because it is not hatred that simple. It is not vengeance, it is not. He's the bad guy. It's even worse. When you realize that the real world does not deliver to the characters in the highlights, He turns people and their systems. The system. The system makes use of feelings as a tool. It takes the love of a daughter and turns it into useful, actionable information. He picks up the urgent need for the house in a state of despair and turns on the racetrack. He gets a call and it turns it into evidence. It takes an act of help and it turns it into a strategy. There is a hero in it. Is there a function? There is an operation. There are a number of decisions, which is asking for permission to anyone's life. I wanted to scream, but it was not for them. I wanted to blame someone else, but that's the fault to Skorogava, because I could see all the layers. I see humanity as a relief to my mother. I could see the coldness in your report. I saw the look in Robert's room and saw his signature on the paper. And I don't think it's my journey from then on. There would be about finding a villain to hate. It would be on the face of the revelations that I really didn't want to see it. Upon accepting the love, you can put it in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong thing. And yet, even so, you need to move to breathe. I stood up slowly, still with the report in my hand, and I was walking down the hall as if he was learning how to walk again. My mother was still on the service, and it reminded me that life is not waiting for the morning to organize. I've been through a glass door and I saw out there in the night, in the car, in the bright light, the shadows lengthened. And then, in the middle of things in common, and I felt a certain bitter if Robert hadn't been there, if he had signed it. And then there were the details that I haven't known the details of my father's. The research on why this was the last known point, and about what Robert had seen the pictures of the room before asking the question that changed everything. I just stood there, with that report in hand, staring at the letters as if they would be able to reorder and turn around something else. But it's not turned. Still, that was an acknowledgement of the cold, the seal of the living. And at the same time, I felt that it wasn't the end of anything at all. It was only by a point on a line. There was still plenty of space to keep him. The mind, when it tries to survive, she looks for a closing of a sentence to the end. The blame is set. Only that night, he had closed, he had not completed a clean. I didn't have that piece of easy to what we see in the stories of well-organized. What he had was a sense that all the pieces were still on the move, even after it took place. I went back to the hallway, and for a few seconds, I found myself looking at ordinary people, doing ordinary things. Someone who was asking for information at the front desk. Someone was holding a glass of water. Someone is hugging someone else. And I thought about how much your life can't be indifferent to it. Not from malice, but by its very nature. The tragedy will not break in the world. It only turns on the inside while the other to continued walking. And that transformation, that is, the more it scares you, because you will realize that you are never going to go back to being the person you have dialed that number. I tried to focus on my mom in that it really didn't matter at the moment. I asked for it, listened for answers to technical. I signed the paperwork. I sat in silence. But on the back of each movement, the practical question Marta Lava. Why is Robert looked at those pictures? For that, he has seen the house. So naturally, why did he do that to the question of my father with such precision? For now, I came to understand that nothing in it that was improvised. It wasn't just a man. In response to an emergency, he was the one running it in a way. I had just gotten in the way at the worst possible reason. I started to remember all of the things that I was always treated as a detail of the family. Conversation stopped when I came into the room. Changed the subject fast, too. Excused absences explanations for all positions. Those little white lies that you seem to be protective, but in fact they are the walls. I grew up in the inside of these walls, so I thought it was normal. But after that night, I began to see the cracks. And then, when you see a crack, then you can no longer pretend that the wall is strong. I've noticed that the relationship between me and my father, it was never just about him going back and forth. It was about what he was hiding, to be able to go back and forth. And then, in the same package, I saw that Robert had not only appeared as a result of this a secret. It seemed to be a part of it. This is the kind of revelation that does not reach the entire time. It comes in waves. First, you deny it. Once you have accepted the obvious. Once you begin to be suspicious of that you do not yet have a proof. And then, finally, you understand and agree that the proof is in the places where you've never wanted to look at. The way I see it, Robert has been changed as well. Prior to that, he was the deputy sheriff who saved my mother's side. After that, he became a deputy sheriff who shot my father. But even so, I couldn't fit it in a simple figure of mind. Not because he is worthy of sympathy, but because there was something there that didn't match up with the narrative that easy. The way he walked into my house as if he was going back to a familiar place. The way that he has avoided for certain glances, as if he knew exactly what I could not say. The way he spoke to me with a calm that seemed to be rehearsed, but at the same time, the human that it's hard to just function. All that's left is a bitter taste behind the scenes. As if he was hiding a very essential part of the story of the world, but to myself. And this is where the mind begins to act in a way that is dangerous. It tries to fill in the gaps with just about anything, just to not be in a vacuum. I found myself making up an explanation. Maybe he knew my father in the past. Maybe it's just you were doing your job, maybe he didn't. Know who I was and who I was, only that these attempts were weak. Because I remember the look of it. I remember the microsegundo on which something is decided on the face of it. When I said about my father, that was not a coincidence. That was the trigger. And I've had it tight, not wanting to. I went out for a few minutes to take the air, close to the entrance of the hospital, and the cool breeze of the night hit my face, as if you tried to wake me up. I looked up at the parking lot, the lights, the cars stopped, and there was a certain annoying one. The story was still going on, but now that she was no longer hidden from view. And now she is exposed to the risk of. And all that came after that was going to mess with that little bit of stability. And I was still trying to keep up. I went back inside. I took hold of the report with more force and strength. And it was there that I came to understand some truths do not appear by accident. They are drawn, one at a time, by making it appear small by the time they are made. And it was my decision that night. He had pulled out a fact that is too big to be quiet. Tomorrow, at this same time, in the sequel of this history will be available to you. And she's even more disturbing is the Robert and hid me from the very beginning. Now you can have a video popping up on your screen. And it is important for you to understand what is coming next. If you've come this far, it's because that's the story you pinned it in some way. Not out is easy, but because it touches on the real choices in making that change, all without asking permission. If this is the kind of content that makes sense to you. If you subscribe to the channel, it's an easy way to keep closer to the stories that are not flat. They are going beyond the obvious and make the reflection, along with the excitement. If you like it, leave a comment telling us which one you have marked the end of the story. It doesn't have to be a long one. It can be a sentence, a word, an honest opinion about everything that came to the fore here. This is to help show what the impact was not just on the screen. And if at any point you feel that connection in this application or on this discovery, and the like, it's just a way to quiet to recognize that and to strengthen this type of content. Right now, there's a video right here on the side that complements all of that you just saw. You click and it keeps me through there.